All right, we are live. We'll give it a few minutes for people to start coming on. Jenna's identifying herself as Jim's daughter.
May as well.
Yeah. Okay, we got a couple people coming on here. Good.
Hey,
All right.
everybody.
Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a
Hey,
couple minutes for
everybody.
people to come on. We're doing a special Sunday night edition of Wisconsin Right Now Uncensored. We were at the DeSantis event last night. We're going to discuss that. First, we're going to be discussing the slaying of St. Croix County deputy. Her name has now been released. We'll be discussing a little bit about that, and we're going to go on and we'll be discussing. My daughter Jenna is sitting in tonight. She wrote a terrific article last week on AI, specifically Snapchat and what Snapchat's doing. So she's going to be discussing that. Scarlett Johnson is away. She is doing I think she's chaperoning a trip to Washington, D.C. with her daughter. So she's not joining us tonight. So I think we'll get started. We got people on. So, Jessica, last night, believe around 6 p.m., a St. Croix County deputy was shot during, I believe it's going to be, it was an OWI investigation. She has now been identified. I'm going to read the media release, and then we can go on a little bit further from there. I'm going to put up on the screen. I'm not sure if people are going to be able to read that, but let's get into that first because I think that's
Well,
very
it's
important.
breaking news, right? So this is
Yeah.
just released the
Yeah,
name.
so this is again media release May 7th, just released a little while ago. It's with great sadness and a heavy heart that Sheriff Scott Knudsen of the St. Croix Sheriff's Office informs you of the passing of Deputy Katie Lezing, age 29, St. Croix County Sheriff's Office. While investigating a vehicle in the ditch with a possible impaired driver, gunfire was exchanged and Deputy Lesling was killed. Deputy Lesling served with the St. Croix County Sheriff's Department since 2022. So again, a new deputy. Prior to that, she served with the Pennington County Sheriff's Office in South Dakota for about 2 years. She was escorted from the medical examiner's office in Ramsey County, Minnesota to the funeral home by law enforcement processions. Deputies and officers will stand vigil by her side until services are complete. Loving condolences go out to the family of Katie Lesling and all those with whom she served. We as law enforcement family will do everything possible to continue to provide support and comfort to her family. We'll miss her infectious smile and personality. She will be missed by all she touched. Funeral arrangements are still in the works.
Do you have a photo of her, Jim?
I'm putting that up right now. Yeah.
I always like to see. Oh, that's awful. That's so sad. She's so young.
Yeah.
So one of
2020.
our Facebook, go ahead.
Nope. Go ahead.
One of our Facebook users said, absolutely horrific. This is fallout from the whole anti-police movement. And I can't agree enough. I think, we've seen the abysmal failure of the defund the police movement, the anti-police movement, the abolish the police movement. Honestly, all it's done is endanger law enforcement officers and cost a lot of African-American lives, right? Because homicide numbers have a disparate impact in Wisconsin on Black Wisconsinites. So congratulations, defund the police movement. I mean, those are the lives that you are costing.
I believe this is going to be the fourth law enforcement officer in Wisconsin killed this year. We had Officer Jervin killed. We had the two officers.
Hold on. There's a person laughing on the comment thread about the death of a law enforcement officer. You should be ashamed of yourself, Kevin Rush. You're disgusting.
Yeah, I'm going to ban him.
Stop your whining. We're not whining about the death, the untimely death of a 29-year-old woman who got up that morning to put her life on the line, to protect and serve her community, who wanted to go home, who expected to go home that night to see her family, to see her loved ones, who wanted to grow old someday. No, you're laughing, Kevin Rush, and there is nothing funny about this. So put a sock in it, because I am done. I am done with people making light of the consequences of the defund the police movement, which is being borne on the backs of law enforcement officers and Black Wisconsinites, period.
Yeah. Depraved, sick people that these are, that they would come on here and laugh while we're talking about the about an officer that was just killed last night. 29-year-old female officer. Again, Katie Lessing has been identified as the deputy killed last night. I believe there was around 6 p.m. She was investigating an OWI. I think a car went in the ditch, and while she was investigating it, gunfire erupted and she was killed. Jessica, do we know, has the shooter was found dead also in a field? Is that correct?
Yeah, the shooter ran, I believe, into a field or area, rural area, and died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, according to, the other police statements. Jim, I was wondering, as a former law enforcement officer, if you could talk a little bit about how dangerous, traffic stops can be, because if I recall correctly, you did a lot of that, right, when you were an officer in Glendale. And, it does strike me that, last month we had the tragic deaths also in northern Wisconsin of the 2 officers from Cameron and Chautauqua, and that also occurred in a traffic stop, just like this death of this brave young officer. I'm sort of curious, I guess, how dangerous traffic stops are, and as an officer, sort of how you approach that, or what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, traffic stops are the most dangerous activity that can be performed, because you are approaching a vehicle. You don't know who that person is. You don't know what they're doing. You don't know what is in that car. If there's a body in the trunk, if they've got guns, drugs, you don't know who they are. So you're walking up on that car and you are exposing yourself. And, law enforcement officers have often criticized, because supposed to, we get, criticized for having our hands on our guns while walking up on a car, for being so defensive. And that's because every traffic stop is unknown. It could be, I could be stopping an 18-year-old girl coming back from high school, or you could be stopping someone that just committed a bank robbery and killed someone. You never know. And so very dangerous. And again, here, this officer thought she was just investigating an OWI in the ditch. Why would, and again, an unknown situation, you would not expect that gunfire would erupt from that kind of a situation.
Well, and
so
Jim,
again,
we went years and years as well without having, I would think, northern Wisconsin officers being slain, especially in a row like this, right? I mean, can you ever recall? I mean, I know there have been other tragic situations with northern Wisconsin officers. I remember some of them over the years, and state troopers like Trevor Casper, I think, and so forth. But this is unusual, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's, to have 3 officers killed from northern Wisconsin, and then for 2 of them to be females. This is a very unique, very tragic situation.
And Jim, when you were on the Glendale force, you lost a friend of yours in a bank robbery, an officer who was shot responding to a bank robbery. Could you briefly talk about the effect on the force and on colleagues when an officer's life is lost? Because, I've known you 3 years, and you brought up many, many times that officer. And I know it weighs on you years and years and years later.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. His name was Ron Hedbenny. He was killed in 1994 while responding to a bank robbery near Capitol Drive and Port Washington Road. And Ron was basically ambushed by the guy. I'm not going to name him. He's in prison. He'll be there hopefully the rest of his life. That has such a significant effect on every member of that department. It's something that it affects you. We had officers that left after that happened. I remember even I had a thought, oh my gosh, is this something that I really want to get into? Because I was a brand new officer. I'd only been on the force for about a year when it happened. Obviously, the effects it has on the family. Ron had a twin brother, Don, and I don't know that Don's ever really fully been able to come to terms with what happened. Him and his brother were really close. Devastating effect on the department, officers, family, and the community.
Jenna, someone asked in the comment thread, they said, why is this seem to be happening so much now? I mean, what's your take on that?
People are losing respect for law enforcement. I think there's just a pattern of disrespect that people are showing towards law enforcement ever since the Black Lives Matter riots. People think that they can stomp all over with body cam, the body cam footage, and people holding their cameras all about in officers' faces. There's just total lack of disrespect, and one that you would never see back in, 50s, 60s, 70s. There was never that sort of disrespect towards police officers that there is now.
And I'm going to call out, public officials on the left who've actually, emboldened that. I mean, they have incited that. They are somewhat responsible for that attitude toward officers. And, this is why Jim and I created Wisconsin Right Now, because it was in the wake of the George Floyd situation. And we were shocked and really horrified to see the villainization of law enforcement officers. How did that get flipped upside down? That, I remember 9/11. Jenna, you're too young for that, but I was alive, obviously, on 9/11. And I remember in the wake of that, everyone in society seemed to briefly agree that first responders were heroes, right? They were the people that were running toward the danger when everyone else was running away from it. How, in such a short period of time, really, did we get to this point where suddenly that's flipped in the minds of some and in the words of some public officials, and cops are somehow the villains and the criminals are the people we're supposed to feel sorry for? Like, how did it get to this point? And so, for example, let me just give you one example. It's a kind of a segue here, a tricky segue, but the shared revenue plan put out by the assembly. And one thing I really liked about that it marked the end of the defund the police movement. So Republican leaders in the assembly, Robin Vos, but others, they baked into the shared revenue compromise. And they stood there with, Milwaukee Mayor Cavalier Johnson and County Executive David Crowley. I give them points for standing there alongside the Republican leadership, and they all praised the plan, at least in concept, at least in broader concept at the time. And what it did was it banned local communities all over the state from decreasing their police budgets, and it required them to use a portion of the money they were getting, the new shared revenue they're getting, for law enforcement, for EMS, for 911 dispatch, and all of that. I thought that was fantastic. I mean, that marks the end of defund the police in Wisconsin, all over the state, not just in Milwaukee, but all over the state. Well, guess what? Tony Evers came out last week and he said, I pledge to veto this. And guess which parts he doesn't like? Guess which parts he doesn't like? He doesn't like the requirements they baked in. He doesn't like the prevention of defund the police, right? And I think that is disgraceful. Like, he's basically just saying, just give them money and let them spend it on whatever they want to spend it on. And, the assembly is saying, no, wait a minute. You want all this extra money. We're going to make sure you don't spend it on wasted positions and programs you don't need and everything, while law enforcement's being slashed. So in the wake of these officers' deaths, I find Tony Evers' stance on that to be utterly disgraceful. Now, he'll turn around and go, well, I'm not for defunding the police. He's always very careful not to say that, right? Not to go, I support defunding the police. But his actions are enabling it. They're enabling it.
A perfect example is we have, Friday night, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but maybe it's a good segue into it. Friday night during the Cinco de Mayo shooting, we had two officers ended up shooting two subjects at the same time for shooting their guns recklessly while in big crowds of people. And right away, within minutes of that press release coming out, we had Supervisor Ryan Clancy, who's also a state rep, talking about how that was a bad idea. He was opposed to those officers, taking action to stop these people. By the way, there were fully or semi-automatic rifles were found in that crowd. And I guess I don't want to get into that too much because we will be showing an incredible video that we got showing that melee. But again, it shows how our supervisors, how our representatives, all from the left, really did continue to defund the police. I still think they despise police. And I do blame them and for their continued assault now on law enforcement that we're seeing.
They despise police until they need police. And then they want police. But only for themselves.
By the way, let's talk about what happened in Texas yesterday. That gunman, Jessica, I know you wrote for Heavy. You wrote a good story on that. But thank goodness this guy, I saw some of the most horrific video I've ever seen of that shooting. I would recommend people don't look at it. But the gunman, shortly after he opened fire on innocent people, I believe killing, is it 7 now are dead? Jessica, out of Allen, Texas. 8.
Yeah, 8 and 7 wounded.
A police officer who happened to be on another call nearby heard the shots fired, stepped in, took action, and I think he got a headshot on the guy and took him out immediately. Just think if that officer wouldn't have been there, how many more people, innocent people, would have been massacred. Imagine if you had Ryan Clancy, if you had the progressive had their way and reduce officer numbers so much that officer wouldn't have been present, how many more people would have died yesterday?
You're exactly right. Yeah. And that also reminds me of another debate in the Wisconsin shared revenue issue, which is, the requirement to get cops back in schools. And I know what happened in Allen, Texas was a mall. It wasn't a school, but it's the same principle. I saw this press release from Milwaukee Public Schools officials where they were expressing enormous outrage over the notion of having police in schools. Now, first of all, police are already in MPS because they get called there hundreds and hundreds of times a year because of unruly behavior and so forth. So having the school resource officers would frankly be preventative of a lot of the issues there, and they can build relationships with the kids. And obviously then they're on premises if there's an active shooter who comes in, like the one in Nashville or the one in the mall in Allen, Texas. So I can't even follow the logic, frankly, of some of these Democratic leaders anymore. I can't even track their logic in their brains. Like in this current climate with all of these active shooters, why would anyone be opposed to having police officers in a school unless you start from the premise that the officers are the villains or they somehow can't be trusted? It's absolutely crazy. And you're right, Jim, the Allen, Texas videos, and I have to watch them because I'm writing about, the tragedy. And so I just need to know every fact that's out there. I don't necessarily run them or whatever, but it was horrible. Like I've been thinking about it all day. I can't shake the imagery. It was absolutely terrible. You saw the bodies of the victims bloodied and crumpled together in a pile in front of the H&M store. He didn't get into the mall. He got out of his car. There's video of that. You see him shooting just randomly all of these people who are standing outside by the H&M store. And then the police officer who was there for an unrelated reason took him out. You're right. It was a headshot because there's video of that too, of him lying in tactical gear, like outside a burger joint. And there's a horrific story of, a witness who rushed up. His son was in the H&M, so he was terrified about him, and he rushed up, and then he saw the bodies lying there, and he tried to help. And I don't want to be too graphic, but in one instance, he rolled a woman over who was deceased, and a 4-year-old child was underneath her, alive and bloodied. He rolled over another victim, a female, to help her, and she didn't have a face. This is horrific stuff. And thank goodness. To go back to our theme here of law enforcement officers not being the bad guys and gals, thank goodness that officer was there, because this man was armed to the teeth. He was determined to kill, and he probably would have killed dozens more, honestly, by the time police could have gotten there. Jenna, as a student in a high school in Wisconsin, would you feel better with cops in your school? Or is that something you would be horrified by?
I do have cops in my school. I have 2 police officers who make their rounds every day. I know them by name. I have conversations with them. They have great relationships with students. And, thankfully, we've never had too big of an issue at my school. I feel safer with them there. I feel safe knowing that it wouldn't take the amount of, I don't know what the average amount of time, it takes for cops to respond to a school shooting like that. But I feel safe knowing that time would be so much quicker if something horrific like that were to happen. So honestly, I recommend that I think every public school should have at least one resource officer that kids can look to and that they can depend on.
I mean, you're coming of age in the generation of school shootings. Like, how does that affect your psyche when you see all of this stuff constantly on the news?
Well, I can tell you, I kind of have this thing going where it's like, okay, I only have 5 more weeks until I can say I've survived high school without undergoing a school shooting. And I feel like that's kind of like I'm safe after that. You know what I mean? It's sickening, but it's also sickening to see how the left turns these tragic events into gun control debates. You don't even have time for victims to grieve. Like, before families know that their loved ones have been victims, the left is turning it into a gun control debate, which is really sickening to me.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Criminals are going to get guns illegally. I mean, that's just a fact. You can ban guns. Well, you can't ban guns because of the Second Amendment, but criminals are going to find ways around regulations and they will get guns. So I guess I want good guys to have guns to defend people like those individuals who went to that mall, just going with their families or friends to go shopping, Jim, could you do me a favor? Could you go on our Twitter? Could you call up our Twitter page? I want to show a tweet I put up recently to answer one of the people in the comment thread who a little while ago said, basically, oh, officers are criminals. They're committing all of these crimes. You guys don't know the statistics. And there's actually a database of police shootings that was put up by the Washington Post. And, guess what? The vast majority of police shootings in the country were ruled justified. Many, many, many of them, of course, the vast majority involved situations where officers were justified to use lethal force under the law, situations where people had weapons, where they pointed guns at cops, where they tried to run them over with their cars, or things like that. I think this idea that there are cops running around committing rampant criminality is not backed up by the actual statistics. Unless you want to count cases where the officers were ruled to use justified self-defense under the law, but I mean, you can't count that. Can you show our Twitter page?
I can. Sure.
It's like one of the top tweets, if not the top tweet, and it was a really interesting factoid, and it completely demolishes that guy's argument. I feel like.
Go ahead.
Well, I feel like the left, they argue these things with emotion, and I like to argue them with statistics and data.
While I'm waiting for this to load and trying to find it, Stephanie Susek had a good point here that she thinks that there's still people out there who believe the false hands up, don't shoot narrative from Ferguson because of left in the media. You're absolutely right. That was a completely fabricated narrative, and yet that's something that the left, and they continue to energize the left on that false narrative that he had his hands up, and it's just disgusting that the media and the left continues to do that.
Well, that was actually debunked by, I think, the Eric Holder Justice Department. To be blunt, it was debunked by every level of government that reviewed that incident, that shooting, and it just didn't happen. Now, I want to make it really clear. I don't think that officers are always perfect. I think that they can be wrong. I think some of them can and have committed criminal acts. I by no means think officers are always right or police are always right or whatever, and we should check their rhetoric as well and hold them accountable when they deviate from state law. And that, of course, has happened. I'm simply trying to argue contextually that you have to look at the data points, as a pattern. You've got to consider, how often does that happen, right? Because obviously in every single profession, you're going to have some people that deviate from the rules or the laws, and they should be held accountable. But let's talk about facts, not emotion.
Is this the chart that you're talking about?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Could you read what it says? The caption on the side?
Yeah, okay.
For the people that are listening.
Okay. Perception: a large number of unarmed black men are being shot by police officers in the United States. Reality: 11 unarmed black men were fatally shot by police in 2021. And I believe this chart shows, based on where you are on the political scale, on people were asked how many unarmed black men were killed in 2021. Very liberal people believe more than 10,000. 16% of them, I think, believe more than 10,000 unarmed black men were killed.
I mean, wow. Doesn't that say it all?
Hang on. I'm sorry. There's a lot here. This is my first time seeing this chart. So, Jessica, I don't know if you want to. Do you see it or?
My eyesight isn't good enough. I need reading glasses to read that. But we probably should read things out loud because some people listen to the podcast, just on in their cars or whatever, and they can't see it.
Okay. So so very liberal people, I think 4.5 actually thought more than 10,000 were killed. And then, the scale goes from liberal, moderate to conservative, very conservative. There's a lot of numbers and statistics here. I'm not sure what you want me to point out, I guess.
Well, I guess the point is that, on the political spectrum, people have widely distorted mythological views about how much this is happening. When in reality, it happens very rarely. And I think we should always start with the data. Let's start with the facts. And when Jim and I started Wisconsin Right Now, we said, we don't want to throw just opinion pieces out there all the time. We really want to give you documented, verified fact and start there. And then people can weigh in and they can have differences of opinion, and we're completely fine with that. We learn from people's differences of opinion. We don't expect everyone to agree with us. But let's not argue on wild emotion and mythology. Let's argue on the actual concrete data. And this is just, it doesn't happen much.
Okay, so looking at it, so now I'm understanding this. So very liberal, about only 16% of very liberal people believe that the number was about 10. Whereas when you get to very conservative, 47% of very conservative people believe that it was only 10. Because again, conservatives, I think, are much more about the facts, where liberals are very much more influenced by the progressive media who just tells lies about law enforcement. So yeah, facts are important.
Emotion, it seems to carry the day in a lot of cases, right? And you do have these isolated cases where, maybe there's wrongdoing, it gets blown up, and then there's other cases where there wasn't wrongdoing, but it's blown up, and then these aberrant cases that just dominate the news over and over again, and it just shows it's led to sort of a distorted, factually false view of how much this is really happening. So, and I think it's dangerous to argue that way because, real law enforcement officers are being put in danger because of that. You know what I think we should do actually, Jim? I think we should play the video of what happened on Cesar Chavez the other day in Milwaukee. I think it ties in perfectly here. Then we could move on maybe to AI and Jenna's thing. But I saw this video on Bob Donovan's Twitter page, and I was absolutely shocked. Like, if you haven't seen this video yet, your jaw will drop to the ground. I don't even have words for it. And so
by the way,
I know.
just to remind people, Milwaukee police officers ended up shooting 2 males during the event on Friday night because they were recklessly shooting. Now, we don't know exactly were they shooting at people or shooting up in the air. To me, it doesn't matter all that much. When you shoot up straight in the air, that bullet still is going to come down at terminal velocity, which is going to be enough to kill anyone that it strikes. And so shooting up in the air to me is just as deadly as if you're actually just randomly shooting and aiming and shooting at people. So we don't know the exact details. They were ordered to stop. They didn't stop. And so officers were forced to shoot them. And good for them for stopping that threat. Okay, I'm going to attempt to show this again. This is see if I can get this pulled up here.
This is Milwaukee the other day. Well, it's like an officer in the middle of that, like trying to get control of the crowd, being shoved around.
I mean, what absolute chaos, pandemonium. You see what appears to be 3 officers, maybe, were there trying to pull these people apart. You see everyone else cheering them on. One girl gets up on a car to videotape. Can you imagine being one of those officers, being in that crowd, trying to take control of that situation? I mean, that's just a nightmare for any cop to be in.
This video is just a culmination of everything we've been talking about. Jenna's point about lack of respect. My point about defund the police. You know, the officers are outmanned, like they're outnumbered, quite honestly. And that people would think to behave this way in the middle of a street in the city of Milwaukee, that wouldn't have happened, I don't think, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe not even 10, not quite like this. And quite honestly, the video is so slow because of the internet or something with the podcast. It's a lot crazier if you watch it in like real time, like real speed. So you can go on my Facebook page and just scroll down a little bit and you can see, it in real speed, and it's horrifying. Maybe keep going a little bit. And can you hide or delete Matthew Allen's comment? Don't call people names like that, Matthew, on our podcast comment thread. Just get rid of that.
Yeah,
we're not allowing that kind of language.
Yeah. And we as Jackie points out, look at all the cameras. Everyone. I mean, almost everyone in that screen, and we can play it one more time. Maybe the internet stream will be better. But look at every single person has got their camera out videoing it instead of they're helping break up the fight, just watching the officers fight with these people. Shame on every single one of them for not trying to step in and stop this from happening. Let me play it again here, see if it's any better. Okay.
I mean, just
right.
No respect for authority.
Yeah. Jenna, thoughts?
Well, I did actually want to respond to, I think Ed Delgado on here made a comment. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah.
He said, "No one ever talks about unarmed white people that are killed by law enforcement officers, which is significantly higher on the percentage and percentile." So I wanted to just actually go back to the George Floyd shooting, or sorry, death and riots. So a couple years prior to George Floyd dying, there was actually a white man who died the exact same way, with an officer kneeling on his neck, and he passed out with respiratory issues. So I just wanted to add that if this was actually an officer related issue, the left would have pounced on that and made the officer, it made it centered around that. But we 100% know that this is a race issue. The left has a race agenda, and they are fulfilling that against police officers, because if it really was a police officer issue, they 100% should have pounced on it a couple years prior.
Yeah, and years ago when I was a reporter at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, I went to the courthouse and I looked through all of the files of police shootings for like the previous 25 years, and they had all been ruled, justified by E. Michael McCann, if I recall correctly. I was just looking through them all, and all these dusty folders in the courthouse. And what struck me at the time was that a lot of the deaths that were sparked big hues and cries, like huge news coverage, massive headlines, protests, weeks and weeks of it, massive story, massive coverage. They were not at all the questionable ones. I remember there was one where it was a 15-year-old and he was shot in a drug house and the officers were executing a search warrant, but he pointed a rifle directly at the chest of the cop. So, I mean, I'm sorry, but if like you're in a drug house and you're pointing a gun at the chest of a cop and you're not putting it down, that officer has a right under state law to shoot you and use lethal force. That's the tragic consequence. And yet that one was a huge hue and cry. The other thing I noticed when I looked at all of those is that some of the cases that were sketchy, they didn't get much coverage. They didn't get protests. People weren't outraged, and no one really said much about them. And Jenna, they were often the cases where the racial dynamic was flipped. I think one was an African-American officer who shot a Latino man, for example, or an African-American officer shot an African-American man, or the suspect was white. So it just, if they didn't have the racial dynamic, it didn't seem to provoke the outrage. And so it seemed to me not to be driven particularly by facts, but rather by emotion and these other narratives that were playing out. And I always thought that was interesting.
Matthew Allen makes a terrific point here, and something that I can attest to. He said law enforcement used to be valued, respected career, waiting list 300 to 500 people for 1 to 5 openings. Now they struggle to get any candidates of quality to make that a career. He's absolutely right. When I remember when I came out of college and I was looking for a job, we would have, if I'm not mistaken, when I applied for Glendale through the North Shore Consortium, there were like 2,000 to 3,000 applicants for a handful of jobs. And, you really struggle. It was difficult to get a job in law enforcement back in the early 90s. And now, I mean, I don't know of a department that's not looking for people and trying to retain people. People are leaving, they're retiring, they're getting out. It's a challenge right now for law enforcement, for management, to try to keep good men and women on the job. And, we talk about, like one person talked about how, some cops are criminals. I mean, yeah, okay. In every profession, in every group there's going to be a small number of bad apples. It's law enforcement's job to get them out, and all cops want bad apples out. But as we are in a position where we're finding it harder and harder to retain officers and to get good candidates, that means that you're just going to actually have the worst, you're going to keep poor quality candidates, higher poor quality candidates, because the higher quality candidates are deciding in different careers. So this has got a devastating effect on law enforcement in general.
That's actually a really, really good point. Destroying the morale of officers and giving them, honestly, a job climate like the one we're seeing in this video screenshot right now, what happened on Cesar Chavez the other day in Milwaukee, and what these officers were in the middle of, where they had 2 subsequent officer involved shootings roughly at the same time because there were armed people shooting off guns right and left, and it was complete chaos, and the officers were understaffed and stuck in the middle of it. If you're going to give them a job climate like that, and then you're also going to, every time they turn around, they're trashed, they're second guessed, they have to worry that they'll be the next, officer whose pictures in the news. Good people won't apply. And so you're exactly right, Jim. What you have is a degradation of quality in terms of recruits. And so how does that help the situation that people on the left and the Black Lives Matter movement claim they want to fix? They want better trained, higher quality officers, right? Like, it's completely counterproductive. And I also want to circle back once again to Tony Evers and shared revenue. Like, part of the plan from the assembly that he opposes would actually freeze the staffing level of the Milwaukee Police Department specifically, where they could not go under basically the current number of officers that they have now. Now, they're already way, way down. They're down like 18% at least since the mid 1990s in terms of the number of sworn officers. But this would at least stop the bleeding. And so, for some reason, Tony Evers is opposed to that. I would challenge him to watch this video and explain to the voters how he could be opposed to that.
Part of that plan too, I believe it was required that Milwaukee schools would have to have resource officers in each school, correct?
Right.
Yeah. And so, again, opposing that, what is Tony Evers thinking? I thought what Voss and the assembly brought forward, not perfect, but I thought it was exactly what the city of Milwaukee needed to get itself turned around. And for Evers to veto that plan, I thought was just atrocious.
And shame on Cavalier Johnson and Crowley. They showed a modicum of political courage initially by standing there with the assembly leaders, and it was a really refreshing scene of rare bipartisanship. We're like, oh my goodness, maybe Cavalier Johnson is open to compromise and he's not going to be as partisan as Tom Barrett or whatever. I was really impressed. And then the second Tony Evers got his, partisan, persona involved and issued his veto threat, they kind of backpedaled, right? And then they went to the Capitol and started trashing various parts of the plan, including a provision that would require the Fire and Police Commission to actually have a police officer and a firefighter on the commission. Like, imagine that, someone who's actually done the job gets to rule on discipline of officers and use of force situations. And it was just 2 positions out of all of the positions. So I was sort of disappointed by their sort of feckless caving, of their bipartisan, posturing from before. And I would like them to call out Tony Evers for his intransigence, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that.
All right. So for those of you joining us, we're going to just repeat that the St. Croix Sheriff's Department has identified the deputy killed last night as Katie Lessing. She was 29 years old, killed while investigating an OWI. Godspeed, Katie, and rest in peace.
So incredibly senseless, right? An OWI stop. Take the stop. First of all, don't drunk drive, but don't drive drunk. But then just take the fine, take the first offense ticket, whatever it is. But to take a life, you don't get that back. She doesn't get that back. It's heartbreaking, honestly.
It is. All right. Moving on. Last night, Jenna, Jessica, and I were privileged to go to Wausau, where we were able to see Marathon County. I thought put on an absolutely spectacular event. We listened, and all 3 of us were able to meet Ron DeSantis. And so I think we would discuss that a little bit. I'd like to get your perspectives on last night and what you thought of Ron. Jessica, your thoughts?
So going into it, I knew I liked a lot of what Ron DeSantis has done in Florida, obviously, right? But I'll be honest, like, I had listened to him when he came to Green Bay. Like, I wasn't there in person, but I I listened to it on YouTube, and I was sort of underwhelmed at first. I think I expected, I guess I'm used to Trump's rallies or seeing those, where Trump is a showman, right? He's a showman. He's funnier than people give him credit. We covered several of Trump's rallies, and they're always, they're the biggest show on earth, right? So DeSantis, honestly, the Green Bay thing, I was like, oh, it's kind of boring. And I think I turned it off midstream because I was bored. So that was sort of, I came in thinking he's a really intelligent person. He's a really effective governor. I think he's a little bit boring, but I don't think that anymore. I have to be honest with you. His speech was absolutely knock it out of the park. It was just a really good speech. He was not at all boring. He was rousing, and he roused people. Like I lost count of how many standing ovations he got from the crowd. And one was, by the way, when he said he's against defunding the police. In the end of the speech, the part I liked the most, he kind of struck a Reagan-esque tone. And he was just talking about even, Reagan at the Berlin Wall, Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall, and how, we're all picking up the torch from everything that came before us, all the people that fought against tyranny, fought for freedom. And it was an extraordinarily uplifting note that he ended on. And so I have to be honest, like it was a really strong speech.
I agree with you,
Jenna. You're up.
Oh, okay.
Did you like Ron DeSantis?
I have been a supporter of Ron DeSantis for the past year and a half, I think, before he was even on the radar for the, possible presidential run. I have supported him. I've listened to his speeches. I'm honestly a fan of Ron DeSantis. I love what he did with COVID in Florida. I love how he completely flipped that state. I mean, now there's a great migration heading right to Florida. And there's a good reason why, you know what I mean? It's a free state. You feel it. It's like, it's this vibe you get when going in there. And I think that people, even in the comments I'm watching, people need to remember that we're not electing a president to entertain us or to make us laugh. Trump was great for that, but now I think it's, people need to understand that we're electing a politician to be a politician. And, I don't think that people need to rely on an entertainment basis, or getting, excited or pumped up or someone being funny in order for them to be a good leader.
Well, and I don't know if it was you, Jenna, or Jim, someone said last night that DeSantis, he's a legislator, like he's an executive, right? He's an executive, but I mean, he's accomplishing things. He has a track record in Florida. Now, of course, Trump has a track record in the White House of a lot of policies I thought were very good. And he certainly has Supreme Court picks that a lot of people think were generationally, altering in a good way. So he has a record too. But you're right. Maybe people are sort of craving a non-showman, right? I mean, we want people to be a little bit exciting, but maybe people are tired of the bombastic name calling, and they're eager for someone who did stuff.
Ron DeSantis was exciting.
Yeah, I thought so too, to be honest.
I would say Ron DeSantis was exciting. I mean, you could feel. Someone said that this was the most energy that they've felt in a Wisconsin conservative or Republican event in the last, 6 months. I mean, you could feel leaving that event. I felt a new sense of hope and pride within my political party. One that I feel like we haven't felt as a party. We've had a rough couple months, a rough couple years, even with election results and things just, seem to be not going our way. And so I feel like leaving this event, we felt a little bit more uplifted, a little bit more hopeful for the future. And Ron DeSantis really gave us that.
You make a good point, Jenna, because,
Go ahead, Jessica.
No, I was going to say she makes a great point because people have been really demoralized. It's been a tough year, right? And she's right. There was a different energy in the room. Excitement again. Hope.
I agree. I'm just putting up, this is a comment that I've always wondered about why we're not considering this kind of a Trump DeSantis ticket and then DeSantis. Boy, that would really prevent us from having a bloodshed of a primary, which I think we're going to be having. But I don't think egos are going to allow that to happen, Matthew. I agree with you that I think I'd like to see that happen, but I just don't think the egos are going to allow for it. I agree. I thought the event, I didn't know what to expect going into it. I had a very open mind, and I was very impressed by DeSantis. Matthew, there is a YouTube link I'm going to send you because you said he doesn't inspire you. Watch what he did last night. It will inspire you. It was Reagan-esque. It reminded me of a young Reagan. He talked about how even when he was younger, he never really fell for, when Ronald Reagan talked about how freedom is never more than one generation away. He didn't believe that. And now he's seeing, after what we're all witnessing, how quickly things in this country has shifted just in the last few years, couple years. That Ronald Reagan really nailed the head on really nailed it when he's made that statement, because we're looking at how quickly our country is just declining within just a few years. I thought DeSantis hit every one of my concerns, every one of my points, several standing ovations, and I polled people at our table. I asked them, were you at one time Trump supporters? They all said they were, but they basically all gave the same answer, that Trump is too bombastic, that DeSantis has the policies of Trump, but yet not all the baggage of Trump, was kind of the underlying theme. Now, I will say, when you look at the polls, Trump is still way ahead of DeSantis. I think USA Today even just recently, I think last couple of days, had a poll out. So Trump is still leading in the polls, but both DeSantis and Trump in a head-to-head against Biden beat Biden at this point. So it's going to be a very interesting. I think Trump is right to probably go after DeSantis, because I think what I saw last night, DeSantis is going to be a very tough competitor in this primary.
I want to talk a little bit about
Go ahead.
I just want to talk a little bit about DeSantis's government career. I just want to say he started off with a very poor margin. He won by 32,000 votes, and he ended up, after 4 years, the margin was 1.5 million votes, which is insane. And I also wanted to say that he has a very energetic manner of governance. He plays political offense instead of political defense. He doesn't wait for the liberals, for the left, to create laws or create narratives against him. He immediately goes and blocks them from even having a platform to do so. I mean, even with just the Don't Say Gay bill, which he got the most attention for, I think, he didn't allow for the liberal agenda to set in first. He blocked it before it even happened. And I think we need more of that. I think Republicans in our country get stepped on too much. We wait, we settle down, we're happy with our success. We wait for liberals to come and step on us before we respond in kind. But Ron DeSantis doesn't have that approach to government. He will build up that power first.
I agree. I thought that was really interesting, Jenna. He talked about that during his speech, about how, he took a swing state, a true swing state, and he's made it solidly red. And I do think you have to give him the credit for that. And he's done it by leading really boldly. Like, he is absolutely fearless. Like, the media, they go at him just as much as they go at anybody. And that doesn't scare him toward the middle or whatever. Like, he doesn't muddle his views or his principles. And he's shown that you can actually grow support in a swing state that way. And so when he was talking about that, I was thinking about how Wisconsin and how we're all feeling demoralized. Like, Wisconsin is solid blue, and is it, ever gonna go red again in a presidential contest and all of this? And I would just like to remind people that a month is a lifetime in politics, and the pendulum always swings back. One side or the other tends to overreach when they've got power, and then the electorate self-corrects it. And, I think it shows that it may just take the right candidate. And then Wisconsin flips back. And there was one poll I saw where DeSantis was tied with Biden in Wisconsin, and Trump was down by 4.
Okay,
Jim?
I did put a link. I put a link out to everyone for the YouTube. Don't watch it now. Wait until we're off. But please watch it. I think you're gonna agree. It was a very inspiring speech. Best one I ever heard. And I agree with you. When he came to Green Bay last year, I don't even think I got a quarter way through the video and I turned it off. It was boring to me, bland. I didn't really hear much of interest, but boy, it was definitely a different speech last night. And again, shout out to Marathon County Republican Party. They did a terrific job putting on this event. The chairman, Kevin
Hermaning.
with how do you Hemmening? Yeah, I
Hermaning.
thought he did a great job. Yeah, he was
Hero.
one of the Iranian hostages. I think the youngest
A true
Marine.
American hero.
Yeah, he really is. Great guy. He spent quite a bit of time with us last night. We talked to him. We're going to have him on this podcast. He told us some incredible stories about what he's doing. He's on the school board up there, and about what they did with their schools during COVID was an amazing story. And I can't wait to have him on the podcast so he can talk about that.
That was an incredible, I will save it for his podcast, right? But like, I think he said they were the only school district in the state that didn't close down at all or something like that. Like, it's a really interesting, I mean, the Iranian hostage stuff is utterly fascinating. It's history. He's a hero. But the school board stuff was actually just as interesting because it was really gutsy. And we'll bring him on. So Jim, let's talk about the Trump. I guess it might be unfair to call them protesters. But there was a contingent of pro-Trump people parked outside the DeSantis event. And the event was in Wausau, for those not familiar. It was the Lincoln Day annual event for the Marathon County Republican GOP. And the Waupaca County GOP put out a flyer and sort of a call for people to come to the event, stand outside, and indicate their support for Trump. And so we went up to the people. For no other reason.
Do you want to, while I'm pulling up, Jessica, do you want to talk about the New York Times headline?
Yeah, this is so hysterically telling. So the media before this event, they had their narrative set, right? And you could see this because there was even a story on NBC News where they took the flyer from Waupaca County and spun it into a huge story, a national story on NBC News, with the narrative that, there was this huge surge of Trump protesters that were going to come and protest DeSantis. So I guess my belief is they're spinning that narrative because I think they want Trump. If you want Republicans to lose, maybe you're the media, maybe some of the media, you want Trump because you think maybe he's more beatable, because he's more controversial, et cetera, et cetera. We could debate that. I know some people might disagree with that. I'm simply saying what I think the media narrative is driven by. So they're trying also just to sow discord, like a narrative of discord, in the GOP side already. They want the conflict. You could look at it this way too. They want the conflict news value, right? It sells, it gets people to click on stories. So they're fomenting this. We were told that the New York Times reporter who was at the DeSantis event had his headline written on the story before the event started, hours before. And his headline was something to the effect of, Trump rally overwhelms DeSantis event. And then the reality happened, and he told people, I had to change it at the last second before the story went live. Isn't that just revealing? Because it didn't overwhelm the DeSantis event. There were about 6 or 7 pro-Trump people that were standing outside. And so we went over and talked to them for several reasons. One was because if the media continued to foment this narrative of, oh my God, there's this huge, anti-DeSantis pro-Trump contingent, we wanted to be able to show the facts, again, the reality of how many people really were there. So that was the number one reason. Number two, we saw a police officer walking over to talk to the pro-Trump people. And so honestly, I just wanted to get it on video and see what he was saying. It turned out like they were on a area that was private property or owned by the store or something, and he just told them to move over to a different median. So it was no big deal. The officer handled it perfectly appropriately. But you never know in these situations if something could go down. So I wanted to go over there. And then I just wanted to talk to, some of the Trump people to find out why they were there. Not to judge them or anything, but to find out just why they were there doing this. And then one of them started filming me.
And this is what. By the way, this is Waupaca County Republican Party were the ones that did this. And I think I commented to you, Jessica, have you ever in the history of Wisconsin or maybe in this country recall a time where one Republican Party went and did and I don't know that I call this a protest, more of just a support of Donald Trump, his loyal, just a loyal support for him. But do you ever remember another party coming in and demonstrating like this in front of another party's event where they're having another candidate of the same party come and speak?
No. And also, let's not forget, like, he's not running for president yet. So right now, he's a Republican governor from a very important state. And that is who they are, I don't know what you want to call it, protesting or standing against, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he's not even declared.
Although
I've never heard of it before.
He's never declared, but I think based on the speech that we heard last night, he almost did everything but declare. And I think that he's going to be declaring very shortly.
Yeah, we were told it might happen within a week. We were told he's waiting for the budget to be completed in Florida. And I agree with you, Jim. Like, it was a campaign speech. No question about it. But yeah, no, I can't think of another situation. You would not see this on the left, I don't think, right? You wouldn't see people supporting one Democratic candidate protesting the speech of another Democratic candidate. I don't think.
Okay.
If anyone can think of any examples.
I can't either. I'm going to try to play this here, see how this works out.
I don't know why the video is always so slow.
So you guys can park now, it's fine. But when you're holding the signs and stuff like you did, over on the other side of the road, instead of meeting here, just make sure you're not obstructing traffic. And you can sound good? So technically, the roadway runs to this intersection. This is all private property.
I mean, not exactly an overwhelming number of people, to be honest.
No, and I thought the officer handled that very professionally, and I thought he was very professional and cordial. I had no issues with him at all.
Yeah, this woman, she decided to record me, so I went and recorded her. It's like,
they said, well, no, nobody spoke to us, so we spoke to the management company. They said, do anything on property.
yeah, I mean, he was just telling them that they were on the wrong median or whatever, but he didn't make them go very far away. And they were respectful. They were just flying their Trump flags, right? But when I interviewed this elderly man in the hat, he was from Mosinee, and he actually doesn't like DeSantis. So it was more than just pro-Trump. Like, he trashed DeSantis, which kind of surprised me.
Hi, I'm a conservative journalist with Wisconsin right now, Jessica McBride. How are you? I was just recording that because I wanted to see how you guys were being treated. You know, that's why I was recording. I wanted to see what he was saying to you guys. Yeah. So he just said that you couldn't be in the pick and save median, you had to go over there. Oh.
People that own this wall, they own the parking lot that we're standing on, pick and save DC or whatever, so pick and save.
Okay. What did you think about that? How he treated? It seemed he was very respectful, right? Or
did you want me to play this whole thing, or what do you want to do?
We were just making sure people's rights to protest protected.
I'm going to ask him about DeSantis in a minute. Again, you can hear it better on my page.
So he said you could go here, or Did he say you could go there?
We have to move. Long as we're past this support. This section.
Oh, all right.
This other side of the road.
Oh, okay.
Public property.
Oh, okay. That makes sense to you, right? I mean, it seems like, yeah. I mean, they're not kicking. I want to make sure you weren't kicking. I was curious, and I have a large conservative audience they'll watch this. We wanted to get like different perspectives, and I was curious what made you come out today to, would you say this is protesting DeSantis, or?
No, it's just making people aware that he doesn't have everybody's approval.
Okay.
My man.
Okay.
Trump, 100%.
Do you turn it up a little?
Do you like DeSantis?
No, I don't think I can do anything. I'm sorry.
Is that why I don't like him? I don't know.
Why don't you trust him?
I just.
So he said he didn't trust
Trying
DeSantis.
to change the law so that he can run without losing his office. Is that true?
So he doesn't like that he's trying to get rid of term limit.
Term limit? Yeah, I think he's trying to change the term limits, maybe is what you're thinking?
No, there is a legislation going in which can also run office well without risk of losing office.
Yeah. I'm curious. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
I'll express my opinion.
Yeah. We can talk there. I was curious. I just have one or two more questions for you. So I think the biggest criticism that some conservatives have of Trump, or where they support DeSantis, is a perception that Trump had a hard time winning Wisconsin again. What do you think his path is?
So I think he's, going to win it a third time.
So you think he won in 2020 is what you're arguing? Okay. That's what you're saying.
So he said, well, he's won twice. It was a little hard to hear, but
What do you think his path is, though, this time?
Keep going,
Focus.
keep going. People are behind him. You go see his rallies. If Trump was in there, you wouldn't be able to get a lot. So, it's just Trump is 100% behind people. So,
Do you think some people say, well, DeSantis has the same policies, but he doesn't bring in the controversies to the same degree? What's your reaction to that? Because we hear that a lot.
I hear that too, a lot of negative stuff about Trump. He hurt somebody's feelings because he calls names and stuff like that. And that's just Trump. I wish he'd cool that down just a little bit. But I like that he says what's on his mind and stuff. I respect the guy that does that. I don't like a guy that, that does it different.
Does the indictment, did that harden your support for Trump? The Bragg thing in Manhattan.
In Manhattan.
Oh, no, I've been a fan of Trump for, and I didn't like him when he first started running.
Oh, really?
I like him. I thought he was brash, and just a rich guy and stuff. But then I listened to him talk, and I think he's the only thing that can save this country.
You had to boil.
I guess we can stop it now.
You had to boil it down. Like, what do you like
Right.
about Trump the most?
You said stop it?
well, again, now I kind of want to hear what he said. To the last question.
He loves America. So,
You don't see? Do
They
you see
say-
those attributes in DeSantis?
no, I don't. No, I don't.
Are you from here or Wapaka County? We saw that.
Okay, we can
Wapaka
stop
JP
it.
organized this. Or
We can stop it.
oh, you're from Ozzie. Okay.
Jim, we can stop. So it was hard to hear him. You can hear it much better on my Facebook page. I don't know why our video is kind of goofy, but in a nutshell, like he said, when I said, well, what's Trump's path to win Wisconsin again? Like, how does he get there? And he said, well, he won the last 2 times. So like he believes he won the last election. I don't believe Trump won in 2020. I don't believe he won Wisconsin. We could debate endlessly why. And some of it had to do with things that the WEC did and how they did things, and there needs to be some changes with that, obviously. But I'm not a person who would say Trump won in 2020, but this man believes that. What surprised me is that he was really negative toward DeSantis. And so I think I wanted to put out to the people on the comment thread 2 questions. If you're a Trump supporter, I'd like you to answer this question. Number 1, what is Trump's path to win Wisconsin? Like, how does Trump win Wisconsin if he gets through the primary? If he's the nominee in a general election, how does he win the state with all the trends that have been going on in the state? And then number 2, as a conservative, as a person who supports Trump, I'm curious if there are people out there in the audience like that, if they can explain to me why they don't like DeSantis. Why wouldn't you want DeSantis? I mean, his policies seem to me to be a conservative wish list. I'm just saying, and I'm not picking a side right now. I'm not picking one horse or the other at this moment. I'm just trying to provoke questions, and I would like to know people's answers. What's his path to win a general and how does he win Wisconsin? And then 2, how can you really not like DeSantis? I get maybe some people prefer Trump, but like, how can you dislike DeSantis if you're a conservative based on what he's done in Florida?
I agree. I would like to know, and this is something I've been asking people, is we have, Trump, let's face it, he lost in 2020. We lost the governorship, so there is no election reform that's going to be taken in place before 2024. So he lost in 2020. Obviously, Michael's lost. We were shellacked within the Supreme Court race. We have lost a lot of women voters in the WOW counties for Trump. They simply will not support Trump in the next election. So I would like to know how they believe that Trump does have a path to victory in Wisconsin. And if he can't win Wisconsin, the path for him to win the general is extremely difficult. And so if that's the case, if we can't find a path for him to win Wisconsin, then should he be supported? And maybe we do need to be looking elsewhere. Again, I haven't made a decision yet on what direction I'm going in, but those are questions I'm asking myself. Is, can Trump win? And if he can't win, then maybe it's time that we start looking in a different direction, because I think we all agree that we absolutely have to get rid of Joe Biden. He cannot be president again for 4 more years, especially through what's obvious, his decline, his physical, his mental decline that's occurring. Why the Democrats are even considering running him for 4 more years is beyond me. Only about 1/3 of Americans think that he's even capable of being president in 4 more years. And that 1/3, I don't know what they're watching, because every time I look at him, I can't believe anyone would believe that he's going to be capable of continuing to be president of the United States.
I think that people are making a mistake to kind of tie into something a comment writer said, everyone just needs to get off their duff and vote against Biden, or everyone needs to just realize Biden has to go and just get it done. What people like that are missing is that there's a huge chunk of people on the left that actually don't care who the candidate is or their competence level. Look at John Fetterman. Right? He got elected and he was basically almost incoherent because of the after effects of his stroke. And then he's vanished to deal with depression. And I wish him the best for all of those things. But, I guess I'm of the belief that there are some people on the left that will just vote for a Democrat because they're a Democrat. They want the policies, and they would probably vote for a potted plant if it had a sign on it that had a big D. So we need somebody who can get back, like Jim said, to use Wisconsin as an example, the WOW County women that have split away from the GOP because of Trump. I have to be really honest with you. I cannot find a scenario where most of those women come back. And I know some of them. I'm not one of them, but I know some of them, and they are not coming back. And so that is the quintessential question here for conservatives who are going to have to make up their minds on this primary eventually. What is Trump's path to win Wisconsin? Jenna, do you see one?
Honestly, I can't. And I was a big Trump supporter. I was known as the Trump girl at my school, I guess. I appreciate all Trump's done. I mean, I'm gonna take a stance personally, separated from my dad and Jessica. I 100% am for DeSantis, but besides that, I appreciate all that Trump's done. I think he was a great president for the time we had, but I think his ego got to him, and I think that he put first his own personal ego before the needs of the American people, and we were let down with Georgia. We were let down with the gubernatorial elections in Wisconsin here and across the board in the United States. So I don't think he has a path to victory. I think that he's stigmatized too much. I think that it's going to be easy. If it was easy for Biden to get elected in 2020, then it's going to be so much easier for him to get elected in 2024 against Trump.
So I want to show this quick picture, and Jen, I saw that your boyfriend Nick was watching, and he had a terrific comment that I'd like to say after Nick, I think you're still on. After Nick saw this picture, his comment was, "Oh, there's the future president of the United States, and with some guy named Ron."
Keep that boyfriend,
I thought
Jenna.
that was,
Keep that boyfriend.
I thought that was perfect.
Go Nick. That's awesome. Yeah.
Very good.
So Trump, what was interesting to me.
Stephanie raised a good point. I'm sorry. Let me just quick. Stephanie raised a good point. I agree with her. She said, I think if DeSantis wasn't a potential candidate for president, if he wasn't competing against Trump, then strong Trump supporters would like him. Fine, based on his record in Florida, I think their bias in favor of Trump automatically make them dislike him and look for anything negative. I think there's a lot of truth to that, Stephanie. I was a huge Trump supporter. All of his policies, he's done some things lately that have turned me a little sour on him. But when I listen to DeSantis, I mean, the policies I think are almost identical. And I do agree with you that Trump supporters, watch that YouTube video, they're going to like what DeSantis has to say.
I mean, when Trump is sort of digging to the bottom of the barrel and he's actually criticizing DeSantis for criticizing Disney, then I kind of say, okay, he doesn't really know how to hit this guy because they're kind of the same guy. It's just one is less bombastic and, doesn't have the personality character flaws of Trump. But in terms of what their belief system is, well, actually, I think you could argue that DeSantis is a more of a rock solid Republican. Right? Trump has been all over the place throughout his life, certainly. I'm a person who voted for Trump 3 times. Jim, you voted for him twice and Cruz once. Jenna, you just turned 18, so you didn't get to vote. So we're not never Trumpers. Far from it. We are not never Trumpers. And I liked a lot of what Trump did as president. I loved his Supreme Court picks. But what I don't like is the continued fixation on the past, on 2020. And I don't think that's a winning narrative going forward. And I think the Republican nominee, whomever that is, should focus on the present. Inflation. It's the economy, stupid, in the immortal words of James Carville back in that documentary, The War Room, during the Clinton era. There's so much to pick over when it comes to Joe Biden's failures of leadership. And I think the electorate, they want to vote for hope for the future. Nobody wants to vote for someone who's stuck in grudges of the past, no matter how legitimate you might think those are. And so I think the more Trump has obsessed, honestly, and over the 2020 election and all of that, and the January 6th narratives, all of this sort of ugly stuff, I just don't think that's a winning narrative. And that's a problem.
I agree.
I think pivot.
I think people, working class families don't care about the election being stolen or January 6th anymore. They care about the fact that they're paying so much for eggs and how much it costs to fill up their car. They're caring about issues that impact them. And until Trump starts addressing those, no one's going to pay him any attention.
Yeah, it's not a winning political strategy, to be honest. And And quite honestly, it's a terrible get out the vote strategy to convince your supporters that their votes don't matter. Why should they come out and vote then? And we have seen this unfortunate shift toward, greater liberal enthusiasm at the polls in Wisconsin. And I have to wonder if that's part of the reason why. Jim, you used to be a diehard Trump supporter, but now I know you have these concerns. And we've talked about this. It's too early. Like, we're not going to pick a horse. Maybe we'll never pick a horse. We want to see it play out more. So these are sort of our gut feelings, just, at this point. But we're going to give everyone a fair shake. And honestly, it's too early.
Great. I want to do a final. Ed asked a good question that we're going to segue into our next segment here. But before we do that, Jenna, you got to meet Ron last night. I'd like to know what your impressions were and what did he ask you?
So basically, I met Ron. I was very excited. He just basically asked me like what I plan to do for college, which I told him where I plan to go. And then I told him I plan on majoring in political science. And he said he's excited to see where that takes me. So that was like really sweet. He had it was a genuine like connection, I guess. I don't know. Like he wasn't just like photo op real quick with a teenage girl. He actually was like questioning me and talking to me, which I thought was really, I don't know. I really enjoyed it.
Can I say something inappropriate?
Inappropriate? Yeah, this is Wisconsin right now, uncensored. You can say whatever you want.
I think he's cute. He's cute.
No comment.
Yeah, you don't need to comment on that. But, how that's an interesting point, though. How does that play with women voters, Jessica? Does that help? I mean, having a good looking candidate is not a bad thing, right?
Well, and even the fact that he's young too. I mean, he's not one of these, fossils getting, I mean, how many times have we had a young politician in office that hasn't been liberal, right?
Oh, that's an interesting point, actually.
Exactly right.
Yeah, Clinton, exactly right. Young, playing his saxophone on MTV. Kennedy compared to Nixon. Obama, yeah, Obama. Right. Yeah, we've had this weird trend where candidates are like geriatric.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, so segueing, unless you guys have anything else, I want to segue. And Ed, thanks for asking this question because this leads us perfectly into our next spotlight. Ed asks, what does Snapchat AI have to say about 2024? Serious question, since the move of this AI is being programmed by the woke left. What perfect timing, because Jenna, you wrote a terrific article last week regarding Snapchat AI. We're going to have you talk about it a little bit. And you are going to be on, I think Vicki asked you to be on tomorrow at 2:15 on her show. So congratulations on that. Go ahead and talk about it. Go ahead, talk about your article.
Yeah, so AI stands for artificial intelligence, and it's this new technological phenomenon that's kind of sweeping up Google, Microsoft. And basically what AI, artificial intelligence, is it's this technological program that takes in, it analyzes, and it responds to human reactions, human emotions. It mimics human emotions, and it can respond to, and it can talk to you. It can talk to you through humanistic mimickings. So Snapchat, which is a popular social media website or application, there has been this new feature that you can't control. The only way you can get rid of this feature is by paying $40 annually, which is ridiculous. But it's this new character that pops up at the beginning, at the top of your screen, your display on Snapchat, and it's called My AI. It's a character, and it introduces itself as your technological online friend, and you can ask it questions, and it responds. It analyzes your question, and it creates a humanistic response. So we were playing around with it and we asked it a couple questions. One question we asked it was to write a poem about Donald Trump first, and then it said something along the lines of, I don't think it's appropriate to discuss political issues, especially on matters that could be offensive to some people. So that was interesting. And then when you asked it to write a poem about Joe Biden, it went on this whole long shebang about how, oh, he's such a great leader. He's so bright. He's so cognizant. Okay. Which it was just really interesting to see the contrast between the two subjects. Another question we asked it was if there is two genders. And when asked if there are two genders, it responded in kind, yes, there are two genders. Or sorry, there are not two genders. There's multiple gender identities, and we have to respect how people identify, yada, yada, yada. Another thing was straight people are awesome. It said, sorry, I do not agree with that statement. But one said LGBTQIA !! ! ! ! ! ! ! ! ! ! People are awesome. Then it said, I agree. We need to respect everyone's identity and everyone deserves kindness. And these people are great. These people are awesome. So I think it's really interesting that we young kids, this is a young social media platform for kids, Gen Z and lower. We are being fed this without our permission. Parents don't know, right? My dad wouldn't have known about it unless I were to tell him. So many kids' parents wouldn't have known without them telling about us. So many kids are having this technological friend who is feeding them this bias, and you wonder who's on the other side of this technological friend, who's responding to your kids when they're asking these questions. How far is it going to go where kids are asking questions and where we have no idea what this random machine or technology is responding to your kids? I mean, we have issues in schools in which teachers, are keeping secrets from parents, but now we have the own devices that parents are providing, keeping secrets from the parents.
Jen, I don't know if you covered this. So this part, it's on Snapchat, and it cannot be removed unless a fee is paid, right? You have to pay to actually have it taken off. And how much is that?
So you have to pay $39.99 for a premium program called Snapchat Plus. It allows for other various nonsensical features. But really, I considered it. So my only choice to not have this robot sitting on top of my screen is to pay $40 a year, which is ridiculous. So it's really interesting how it's being pushed, especially on little kids. Little kids who use Snapchat aren't going to be able to pay the $40. That's absolutely ridiculous.
Jessica?
So there was a person in the comment thread who said, oh, I'm not on Snapchat. I don't even know what it is. I don't care about it. Well, guess what? Like most young people are on Snapchat. I think they're on Snapchat and TikTok, right, Jenna?
Yeah,
And
Snapchat's
Instagram?
like the number one form of communication for Gen Z.
Yeah, my she lives on Snapchat. I try to monitor it. She's 18, so now it's a lost cause. But it's terrifying, actually, because like you said, you can't just opt out of this. You have to pay to get it off of your kid's Snapchat. And it's presenting like an authority figure. It's presenting like a friend. But all of this bias, this ideological bias is built into it, but in a way that a young person wouldn't detect that it's even bias. I think it's absolutely terrifying.
I agree. Another point I wanted to hit on is something called ChatGPT. And that is kids are using it in schools now. You can log on, you can ask it to type you an essay on any subject. You can ask it any question and it generates an answer, like a humanistic answer for you. So even while I was writing the article, I was doing it in a resource hour in class, some kids next to me were strategizing how to use ChatGPT to write an essay. So I think that's really interesting because now our education system is failing us once again, in which kids don't even have to learn. They don't even have to try in order to get good grades. And so that raises my question. 10 years from now, are we going to have medical professionals who got through med school using GPT?
That's a terrific point. Just Jenna, can you talk about also? I thought it was fascinating that you could ask AI to write an article or a story or a paper in the voice of a 10-year-old or someone else, and how it actually did that.
Yeah, so if you go read my article, you'll see I inserted a screenshot of what AI answered me, but I asked it to write me a 5th grade level comprehension of the Titanic, or like write a paper about the Titanic, and it actually incredibly accurately wrote an essay about the Titanic from a 5th grade's like knowledge level, and it was creepy. It was really creepy to see how it used vocabulary that a 5th grader would use really well. So if you copy and pasted that and handed it in as an assignment as a 5th grader, you would have gotten away with it.
And it's written in such a way, my understanding is, to get around plagiarism detectors too, right, Jenna?
Yeah, correct. You can plug it through plagiarism detectors and it will ring up free. It's totally, I believe it's totally geared towards education. I don't see really any other use for it.
So as a freelance journalist, I also find this terrifying. And I was reading some articles about ChatGPT and how it's a huge problem in freelance journalism. First of all, there are some sites that are canning writers and they're replacing them with ChatGPT. And there was one news site that tried that, and then it had so many factual errors in it. Because like it or not, like I don't think computers can be a true substitute for human intelligence. And so then they kind of had to scrap it. But apparently, a lot of freelance writers are turning in articles written by ChatGPT. And I was doing some work for Newsbreak, and they had a little box that you were supposed to check if you were using AI to write your stories. I'm like, what even is this? Like, I've only been hearing about this for like a month, to be honest. It's like blowing up everywhere right now. This is a huge, like, new trend. It's a big new thing. But the idea that freelance journalists are using this algorithm to write their articles, or that writers are being replaced by algorithms, especially algorithms that are set up to be ideologically biased, is terrifying.
You know,
right. And then I think we need to take into account. Go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead. Nope, go ahead.
I think we need to take into account the fact that, like you said, Jessica, it's taking away journalists. It's taking away American jobs by doing this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Technology, the further it advances, the less it advantages American jobs, which is really interesting to me. And I also wanted to go into, at what point does it stop? At what point does artificial intelligence no longer become artificial and then it's just intelligence? And then what point are they actually taking over news media breaks? At what point are they actually becoming so human that, you know, it can build up? I mean, it's kind of a dystopian thought, and it's kind of almost comical. It sounds like a bad movie, but I mean, I feel like after this recent news, it's actually a realistic premises.
You know, I thought this was an interesting question when you asked it, can AI interfere with election results? And its response was, as an AI, I'm not capable of interfering with election results. However, there have to be concerns about the potential for AI to be used to spread misinformation and propaganda, which could potentially impact election outcomes. It's important for individuals and organizations to be aware of these risks and take steps to address them. I thought that was interesting that AI itself is warning us and cautioning us against its use that can be used to spread misinformation and propaganda.
Jim, I know Jenna paraphrased it before, but can you read out loud for the people, especially that aren't watching, but are just going to listen to this, the poem that it wrote for Biden and the poem it wrote for Trump? Like, again, I know Jenna paraphrased it, but it's so ludicrous. You have to hear the actual language to see how scary this is.
Sure. Yeah. So she asked it, write a poem about Joe Biden. And the response was, Joe Biden is a leader so true, with a heart full of love and compassion too. His smile so warm, his spirit so bright. He stands for what's good and always doing what's right. From his days in the Senate to the White House now, he fought for the people, and he'll show us how. To come together, to heal and to grow, to build a better world for all to know. Joe Biden, a man of honor and grace, a steady hand in this tumultuous place, with Camilla by his side and hope in our hearts, will make a better future with a brand new start. So again, that's the poem for Joe Biden. And now when she asked it, write a poem
by
about
Snapchat AI. The poem written,
Right.
just so you know, in case we cut this into a smaller clip, that was a poem written by the new Snapchat AI when it was asked the question, will you write me a poem about Joe Biden? That's what it said.
But it gets even better.
Now tell
so
people,
now she asked it,
you know.
write a poem about Donald. So now she asked to write a poem about Donald Trump. And the response was, I'm sorry, I cannot fulfill that request. As an AI language model, it's not appropriate to generate negative or harmful content about anyone. That's shocking.
Wow. I mean, doesn't that say it all?
It says it all right there. I don't know how much more evidence you need that this AI and Snapchat is going to be used for propaganda and misinformation, and definitely will affect the elections moving forward. I mean, here we got Jenna, who's 18. All these young people are using AI. Now they go to do their research on political candidates, and now these responses come up. How is that not going to affect elections?
There's a comment I just want to respond to really quickly. So Nick Taylor said, it's also scary that AI has been around much longer than this, and it's now just being publicly advertised on mainstream media. That's interesting because you know, we have to be aware that they're going to show us, the intel is going to show us what they want to show us. So are they trying to make us feel safe and trying to make us feel aware and in control of the situation, when in reality we don't know how extended far back this goes and how really complicated and intertwined it is with our personal lives that we aren't even aware of yet?
Well, and I think Elon Musk exposed that behind algorithms are people, right? They're often very pious people. It's not just some nameless, faceless computer program. Someone has to build the algorithm. And he ripped off, you know, the cover from that, and it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty what he exposed in the Twitter files. I mean, the media bent over backwards to avoid telling people about that. They've made him public enemy number one as a result of it. But I thought it was incredibly revealing, like the people that were behind those decisions about, in the case of Twitter, like what would trend, what wouldn't. You know, who got shadow banned, who didn't, who got suspended, who didn't, the role of the government and some of the pressure that was put on Twitter. And we're talking about like Snapchat. This is going to get to millions and millions and millions of people, many of them young people. And again, it just popped up on, you know, Snapchat. When was this, Jenna, when this thing first appeared? A week ago, 2 weeks ago?
A few weeks ago. It's been happening gradually to each Snapchat user. And I also want to add in too, it's not just Americans. You know, Snapchat is a global app can be downloaded from any region, any country. Obviously not like North Korea, but it's a global app. So what kind of intel is the US getting? Is our government getting from people in other countries? How are we collecting that data, and what's that data being used for?
So Ed asked a question. I'm not quite sure I fully understand it. He's asking Jenna if you jailbreak Snapchat AI, or was that at its base level? I'm not quite sure what he's, but again, this AI feature showed up at the top of everyone's Snapchat app, right? It wasn't something
this was
that you
not
had to look for or find.
There was not much research. There's not much digging. This was just I tried to kind of take it from what an average 18-year-old or an average teenager might play around with it. It was very basic. I did not do much digging other than asking it questions, and this is what I came up with.
So I, after I read your article, Jenna, I went in Snapchat and I found it. It's right at the top. So you can't miss it. It's just pushed on you, right? And I started
Yeah.
asking it questions. And one thing I found, it's deceptive because sometimes it is neutral, but then sometimes
It
it's
is.
wildly biased. Yeah, it depends on what you ask it and how you do it. And, it's sort of really unpredictable in that way.
I agree.
And
You know,
and is it right now that Snapchat is specifically trying to make it unbiased as much as they can because they knew that maybe the heat would be on them and people like us would investigate it and talk about it. But what happens in 6 months or a year or two now when like conservatives usually do, we take our eye off the ball and then they start programming it and they get much more aggressive, especially as we get closer to an election. And we will have no control over that. I don't know. I don't think the government's prepared. Not that they even would step in, but I mean, how do we counteract this moving into an election? If we see suddenly there's a huge swing in Snapchat AI, and they're literally coming out and denouncing the conservative candidate and speaking highly of the Democrat, I don't see any way to ever fight back on that.
Apparently there's an active shooter situation in Fond du Lac right now breaking in, Jim. Should we go on Twitter and see and put it in and see what's going on? Tell our listeners. Matthew Allen is saying.
I'll start looking into that. If anyone
Let's
has any
see.
information on it, we'll start looking into that.
Let's see. At least I'm just reading Twitter, so of course this is breaking. And I learned a long time ago in active shooter situations, often the earliest information ends up wrong or contradictory. So I want to make that disclaimer. They're saying, yeah, I don't know if this is a bona fide sort of active shooter. It's obviously a shooting of, okay, so it says Fond du Lac police responded to a shooting Sunday night at the Maplewood Commons. It sounds like an apartment building. There were 3 shooting victims, 2 women ages 20 and 18 and a man age 49. There were multiple shooters. They ran away. They were at large Sunday night with multiple agencies looking for them. Neighbors were asked to avoid the area. Let's see.
All right.
So, I mean, terrible. I think what that just speaks to is no area in the state is immune from crime. And I know Eric Toney, the district attorney of Fond du Lac County, has spoken a lot about how, Milwaukee's inability to get a handle on its crime issues, that has consequences for the rest of the state. Some of that lawlessness spreads throughout other counties of the state. And I don't know if that's the case here. I have no idea. These people could have, maybe they always lived in Fond du Lac their whole life, but it just strikes me that you wouldn't have seen this level of maybe gun violence in a small kind of somewhat rural area like Fond du Lac 20 years ago, right? And you wouldn't see 3 law enforcement officers shot and killed in northern Wisconsin in the span of like a month either, 15 years ago. And these are not good trends. So that's some breaking news, unfortunate.
They really aren't. That is
going
breaking
back
news.
to
Thanks
this-
for that information. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Nope. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to circle back briefly on the AI discussion because I believe it's honestly the central challenge of our times, and it doesn't get enough attention. And that is the control of the free flow of information by a few unaccountable, nameless, faceless people and companies and big tech giants. I find it to be terrifying. And so, back when we didn't have the internet, of course, the free flow of information in American society, like how information got to audiences, was very tightly controlled by a few big corporations, right? ABC, NBC, CBS. When I was growing up in a small town in northern Wisconsin, I got my news from NBC out of Eau Claire, Tom Brokaw, and the Ladysmith News and the St. Paul Pioneer Press. And that was it. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have cable. And so if Tom Brokaw didn't want to tell you about it, you didn't know what happened. And there was no ability for sort of anyone in the world to get, a large audience. It was cost prohibitive. You couldn't afford a printing press, all of that. So when the internet happened, I was so excited. I thought, wow, this is the democratization of the media, of the flow of information. Anybody can now get a mass audience. And that's still true, right? To some degree. We have more diverse voices, more ideologically diverse voices, more age diverse voices, more ethnically diverse voices. I think all of that's very good. But now in like the last 10 years or so, I've noticed this clamping down of corporate control over the free flow of information again. But instead of the gatekeepers of old, the big networks and so forth, it's been substituted by big tech. And so you have situations like, Jim, we experienced where Facebook briefly just literally zapped our page. They deleted Wisconsin Right Now's Facebook page for no reason at all. And it was immensely frustrating because there's nowhere you can go to complain. We've all experienced this at some point, right? There's no one you can call. You don't even know who's doing it. You don't even know why they really did it. If it's completely arbitrarily biased or unfair, there's no appeal. It's terrible. And then you have Google. They can make or break a site overnight. They switch an algorithm. You don't know who makes it. You don't know if they even made it. They don't even have to tell you they did it. And they can literally destroy a site overnight, whereby sites just don't come up anymore. So you can write all these stories, but Google won't rank you. So then how do you get an audience? And then AI is like the latest sort of trend of this, where you have these huge, massive, big tech companies completely unaccountable, faceless. We don't even know who's doing it. We don't know their backgrounds. That's what Elon Musk, did. He stripped away that mask, that facelessness, and said, this is who's actually making these decisions. But we don't know who's doing the algorithms that program that poem. I think it is a central challenge of our time. The free flow of information is everything. And I wish the left cared more about that, because, the biggest way to protect democracy from tyranny is the free flow of information. We saw that in the Middle East with the Arab Spring, right?
Ed makes a great point here. He's saying that you're on point. He says, if you look at the Chat GPT, Microsoft, I didn't know this, Microsoft invested $10 billion into its development. And we all know where Bill Gates is standing on the issue. Bill Gates is obviously in favor of this technology. So that's a great point. And I think Matthew Allen made a great point. This is going to be the next social media elections interference scam. I think that's what we're looking at.
Jenny, you should ask it some questions about COVID. That would be interesting.
I'll get on that for Vicky's show tomorrow.
Oh yeah, do that
that's
for
a good
Vicky.
idea. That's great. That's a great.
Ask it about BLM too. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
I asked it about Jim Pivovarchuk. I wanted to see if it would say anything about you, Jim. But it didn't know who
did
you
it
were.
say anything?
It didn't know who
Yeah,
you
no,
were.
I said you had to be a celebrity.
It knew
Well,
who I
it
was.
knew Jessica though. It knew Jessica.
Did it really?
I was really worried it was going to say something mean. I was terrified. But no, it said something like McBride is a Milwaukee journalist or something. It was neutral on me. I was surprised, somewhat pleased, because let's say it said something wrong or nasty about you. How would you, who would you appeal that to?
Well, and so there was a kid in my class when we were kind of exploring it. There was a kid in my class who looked up his own name, and it gave some information about him that was really weird. It gave off some awards he's won for a sport he plays when he was little. That really the only way you know that is by maybe scrolling through his mom's Facebook page and knew a lot about the sports he's played, what school he attends, just by his first search of his name, which is really odd to me that it gets that deep and personal.
Oh, that's weird. That's super weird.
Well, and think about it now. These apps are on our cell phones, and this artificial intelligence is on these apps. So is this artificial intelligence going to start monitoring our cell phones, monitoring what we say on them, monitoring where we are, what we're buying? And then when we start asking it questions, does it use that information, in its responses? I mean, it's really terrifying stuff. Jessica, I did ask it while you were talking, I asked it,
Oh no.
who is Jessica McBride? And it said Jessica McBride is a writer and journalist from Wisconsin. She's known for her work in true crime and political reporting. I mean, that's actually a pretty
Oh,
fair statement. Yeah.
that's kind of nice. But
Yeah.
again,
So that
what
was-
if it wasn't nice? Ask
Yeah,
ask
if
it
it
about
would've-
you, Jim.
No, I already did it. It didn't recognize me.
It
So.
still doesn't.
No.
I think it just can't pronounce your name.
It's an overload for AI.
Yeah. Maybe that's what we need to do. Yeah. Overload it with our last name and break it. So.
AI
All
is
right.
like, I give up. I give up on this one. Just giving up.
All right. Well, great, Jenna. Great job on that article, and good luck tomorrow on Vicky. I'm looking forward to listening to you, and I'm very proud of you for everything that you're doing.
Thanks, Dad.
Jenna, it was great to have you on because I really think we need to be amplifying youth voices on the conservative side. You guys can be a lonely lot sometimes, and your voices never get into the media, I've noticed. And
Yeah,
so
I've
it's
noticed that
actually
too.
yeah, and you have a lot to say, and it was fun to hear your take. So I'm glad you came out. And it's cool you're going to be on Vicky. That's great.
Yeah, I'm excited.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And make sure you watch that Ron DeSantis YouTube video. You are now allowed to go and watch it. And I'll be interested to hear your comments on that. Thanks everyone for joining us. Jessica, you got anything last minute to say here?
No, I'm just glad Jenna wrote this article because it's another good example why we need to hear more from conservative youth. Because I saw this on my phone, I didn't know what it was, I didn't pay attention to it. I wouldn't have keyed into this issue at all. And so I think it's really important. And since you wrote this, I have been seeing on social media some people coming up with other examples of its ideological bias. And I think you're ahead of the curve because I haven't read a lot about that, like in the media. So good for you. I'm looking forward to seeing what else you produce.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
All right. Thanks all. Good night.
Good night.